the reasons I thought it would be interesting just to kind of talk to you today, maybe for people who are watching this, be interested, is you're helping churches right now so much, both in legal issues, but also then trying to untangle some of the legal issues with COVID. It'd be interesting maybe just to hear some of the things that you've been having to deal with.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about it for me is that usually the law is thought of as being pretty slow, and it is pretty slow. Our process, it takes a while to pass new laws and create new laws, and then it also takes a while for those laws to be adjudicated, the court system and appeals, and you hear about case lasting for years and that kind of stuff. But with a pandemic and in an emergency, the law moves surprisingly quick, and so Congress has been passing relief bills and pandemic response bills and things like that. They've done several, and there's talks of them doing another one. And each time they do, there are new rules. In addition to all that stuff from Congress, there are all these executive orders from the governor, and then sometimes mayors and county judges taking stuff into their own hand. And they're kind of bypassing the legislative process altogether and writing these orders for these more immediate relief that's needed. And so you've got all of these local and state orders, executive orders about masks and groups of how many people and all that kind of stuff. And so churches need guidance with that too. And so surprisingly, every few weeks there's a new law, and that's not what we're used to. We're normally used to this process taking much longer. Pastors and church leaders, all church leaders, are in an unusual position where, in addition to all of their regular pastoral duties, they're having to become many legal and medical experts, trying to consume as much information as they can on these new laws and what health organizations are saying. And this new study came out and says this. And so it's a lot of information for church leaders to consume.
With what you're dealing with right now, what's the number one question, or maybe the top couple of questions that you get from churches?
It was, how do we return to in-person worship and make sure that we're prepared for that? And that's still a good question. And a lot of churches that returned to in-person worship had to stop again because of the number of cases in Texas. But preparation, there were lots of questions about what are the guidelines about leaving every other pew or row of chairs empty and sitting X amount of feet apart, and how do we communicate about masks, and do we require masks or recommend masks, and all kinds of questions about preparation. The new questions all have to do now, unfortunately, with, okay, there's been a case in our church, someone tested positive, now what? How do we communicate that? How do we do it in a way that protects this person's medical privacy, but also letting the church know that they may have been exposed? How long do we have to wait before we can get back together again? Who's truly exposed and who's not? And a lot of those questions aren't really legal questions, but the way that they kind of fall back to me is there's a question about liability. How do we behave responsibly and in a way that reduces risk of spreading the virus, but also reduces risk? We don't want to be seen as being negligent or behaving in an irresponsible way. And so there's that legal question. How do we reduce our liability? And then the even more important biblical and Christian question of how do we love our neighbors well? How do we love our congregation well? How do we go above and beyond even what the legal standard is for how our church should be behaving? And so as a Christian and as an attorney, I try to blend those things together when I try to give advice to churches.
Well, and I found that really helpful. In fact, I found kind of your model for how to digest it. Okay, this is the legal bar, here's the ethical bar, but then here's the Christian kind of side of that.
And it almost gets
very helpful.
It's progressively, I know I'm going down the list, but it actually is getting progressively higher. The legal bar is the lowest. Yeah. What's ethical is a little bit higher, and the Christian standard is even higher than that.
I did notice recently you kind of took notice of an article that had kind of expressed great concern about churches opening, but didn't necessarily interpret that in a very accurate way.
Yeah, I think it was one that in the New York Times, and specifically saying that churches were a major source of coronavirus cases, which the facts didn't really bear out. And so I just wanted to kind of encourage pastors and church leaders and congregations that I know are being responsible, that I know are taking the lead in serving their communities, and oftentimes voluntarily suspending or sometimes completely canceling activities like camps and vacation Bible schools. Church members, people of faith, have made a lot of sacrifices this summer in the name of safety for their communities, and are really leading the way in. And the other thing is, churches don't have to. A lot of times, because of religious liberty and the First Amendment, they're exempt, and the government can't tell them that they have to cancel that camp or that vacation Bible school. And so they're doing it voluntarily, just out of a genuine love and concern for their neighbors. And so I just think it's really important for people to know that, that, again, like we were talking about a second ago, the legal requirement may be that you're exempt, but a lot of times churches aren't saying, well, I'm going to do this just because I can. They're saying, even though John says we're legally exempt, that's not the responsible thing to do. And so churches are making a lot of sacrifices for their community and serving in a lot of great ways. I really commend churches, particularly the churches I've been working with, that when I hear someone like you say, thanks for posting this stuff, it's helpful, it encourages me, because that tells me you're really seeking out information and trying to make decisions about what's best for not just their congregation, but the community that their congregation is trying to minister to. So